of the Environment Committee. First up is approval of the agenda. Are there any concerns or changes that you'd like to make? Then we will consider the agenda approved. Next up is approval of the July 11th, 2023 Environment Committee minutes. We need a motion and a second.
I make a motion. Second.
Anything anybody wants to discuss, changes? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. No consent business today, so moving on to the non-consent business, 2023-165 is master contracts for Interceptor Engineering Services, contract 22P375. Mr. Remus, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. Just give me some. Oh, thank you. All right. Yes, Madam Chair, today I'm here to present a business item as stated by the chair. So we'll move right on to the next slide. So our group is in need of new contracts as our current ones are becoming low in contracting values. These contracts support basically all the work we do as an Interceptor Engineering Group, along with supporting our operations group in program efforts. So last year we put together a new RFP for engineering contracts and included the service areas that you see on the screen, these 6 service areas. Our primary need is for engineering and architecture support to continue design efforts and program efforts for the capital program. Other service areas that are listed here were added to the RFP as their common needs, which also support the engineering and interceptor program efforts. And we also had a goal of needing to grow our depth of bench or additional design firms and consultants, just because our program is growing and it's taking more companies, more people to perform that work and maintain the level that we're expected to deliver. And we also hope to include some specialty skill sets as the cultural planning is one example of that. So just a brief solicitation summary. We requested proposals on November 29th of 2022. The disadvantaged business enterprise or DBE goal was set at 15%. And on January 11th of 2023, we received 18 proposals by the firms listed. And I don't know if I'll read all those, but those are the firms that submitted respective proposals. So once those proposals were received, they were given out to the panel members. So just a brief summary of what you see here is the panel members and the evaluation criteria used. So those proposals were given to an evaluation panel that was comprised of 5 environmental service staff, and they were primarily subject matter experts that reviewed the quality of the proposals, the qualifications of the proposer, and the experience of the proposer. It should be noted that costs were not reviewed by this initial group based on the Brooks Act procurement, which cost is removed as initial criteria. So based on the panel recommendations, they recommended the 12 firms that are in the presentation this evening. Those 12 companies were then asked to submit cost proposals to our procurement group. And then the second panel, which is noted here, 4 environmental service staff members reviewed those cost proposals and evaluated them for fair and reasonable prices and fees and made their recommendations to the procurement group. And with that, Madam Chair, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contracts 22P375A through L For Interceptor Engineering Services, the cumulative amount not to exceed an amount of $52 million as follows. And I'll just list these off individually for you. Brown and Caldwell, contract A, contract amount of $8,670,000. Both Infrastructure and Environment, LLC, contract B, in the amount of $8,160,000. TKDA and Associates, contract C, in the amount of $3 million. Sventek Consulting Services Incorporated, contract D, in the amount of $7,500,000. SEH Incorporated, contract E, in the amount of $6,670,000. Bolton and Mink Incorporated, contract F, $3,330,000. CDM Smith Incorporated, contract G, for $6 million. Kimley Horn and Associates, contract H, $6 million. CNA Consulting Engineers, contract I, for $1 million. Barley Associates, contract J, for $1 million. 106 Group, contract K, for $340,000. And HDR Engineering, contract L, in the amount of $330,000. With that, I can be available for any questions.
Thank you. That's quite a list of people. Or corporate companies. Did you find all of the specialty skill sets that you were hoping to get bids from?
Madam Chair, yes, I think it was a good, from what I understand, good set of proposals. I should note on the last one, the last slide, the last four are service area specific. The CNA and Briarley are tunneling and specialty excavations, and 106 and HDR Group are cultural resources and planning.
Okay.
Other A&E firms also have those service areas in-house, and they proposed on various service areas, and that is just cumulative into the amount of the award, is how I understand it.
Thank you. Councilmember Cedarburg.
I have a question with respect to the DBE goal of 15%, and 15%, 5 million is 5%, 15 million, so 17 million dollars should be DBE. First question is it 15% of the total 52 million divided amongst all these contracts kind of total, or does each company need to have 15% DBE? And then second question associated with that is, what exactly is the type of work that the DBEs are doing? Because none of these, I don't think, are DBEs. 106 Group might be women-owned. So again, we're at a position where there's a lot of money, but they're not going to DBE firms that are, they're going to large contractors. So, exactly what type of work are the DBEs doing so they can get more experience to jump up into these bigger contracts, and then how is that 15% proportion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is the 15% is per respective value. So for each firm, 15% of that value is their respective DBE goal for their contract. As far as the different types of work, I see Ms. Jacoby is.
I was just going to call her up.
Also, yes. Thank you, Judy.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg. So each of these contracts with different organizations and different values are because of the different disciplines that they've been assigned based on the proposals they've submitted. For example, I asked about Brown and Caldwell's proposal was 89 pages long. There's a lot of detail and a lot of different work, and that not to exceed amount with them is $8,670,000. There are individual work orders that the project manager will issue based on specific tasks. And with each individual work order, there will be goals assigned with that. And so that goal would be at minimum 15%.
Just a follow-up question is, so are the DBEs, these are a lot of engineering consulting companies, I'm familiar with all of them, I've worked with all of them. And sometimes to meet the DBE qualification, the DBE firms are not engineering firms, they're doing non-technical work to get to that 15%. So I'm hoping that, you know, the lift here is lifting up DBE engineering firms, not DBE administrative assistant firms to qualify, or drafting firms or data management firms. They're all very, very good, but where there's the gap is trying to lift up DBE engineering firms and to try and pull them into projects and do that, because I've been on the other side of this, and the DBEs can be GIS companies and all of that, but to make them a real project partner and not just to match that 15%. That's my concern.
Are you aware of with the proposers if what the subcontracting is made up of?
I do not know all the specifics to that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg, we can follow up.
Yep,
if that's.
I mean, the work has to be done, you have to get the contracts. I'm just, as a whole, trying to continue to lift up the other firms into stronger and bigger companies so they can get the $3 million grant and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question, like, how many interceptors are so per contract? Is that isolated per interceptor or a cluster of interceptors? How does it break down?
So the top 8 firms on that list are all for engineering architecture. So they would work on the entire system, not specific areas. So the entire regional system for interceptor and lift stations, force main siphons, all our assets.
And I also have concerns about the amount of DBE and minority engineers and also women that are involved in these systems, because I've seen in the past where sometimes they'll make linkages and partnerships just to bring a person in, one or non-technical or semi-technical aspects. You might even bring some engineering techs in just to get the contract. And so I'm hoping that our safeguards, we're not like business as usual kind of approach to things, and we're really scrutinizing these in a proper way.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember Carter, I mean, that's a really strong statement, and I think that's a good message to send back to the project manager when they're scoping out the work. And they will need to, if there is one firm that has, for example, architecture and engineering is the core work that many of these firms will have a contract under if you approve. And so that can be a strong statement when they're pulling, and a requirement in the scope of work when they're pulling out the scope of work to have these multiple proposers bid on it. They can have that specificity of who's doing the work and what the work is going to be done. I'll also mention that this is one of the first projects where procurement and the business unit partnered with forecasting it. This project was advertised multiple months before it went out to our disadvantaged business enterprise and the MCUB, which is the Metropolitan Council's underutilized business, to really push this opportunity out to all of our known vendors that this opportunity was here. So a much broader reach out to the communities to let them know that this was available.
Councilmember Osmond, did you have something?
I just want to follow up the DBE. So the goal was 15%, right? So do we have met the 15, or what was the exact number, 16 or 15?
Yeah. Chair Wolf, council member. So that information isn't public. The only thing that's public at this time is the name of the proposers and the information and the business item. What I can tell you is the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, and I don't think anyone is here tonight, but they reviewed all of these proposals and all of the DBE commitments and passed all of them that they met the requirements that were outlined in this solicitation. So many of them may be higher than the goal that was set of 15%, but that floor was reached.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cedarburg.
Just a follow-up question. So is this 5-year contract, 10-year contract? Did it say?
Madam Chair, the term of the contract is 5 years.
So given that it's 5 years and will there be some kind of assessment at the year mark or the 2-year mark to look at the projects, to track the DBE, to see what the performance is of our A&E firms and to report that back? Because let's not wait 5 years, but let's see as the projects are being bid out the first year, the second year, and let the companies know that will be tracked and will be reported back to the council. I'd like to see that on a pretty consistent basis on projects like these. Thank you.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg, it's my understanding, again, the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity does work with the project managers and each of these contractors to make sure that they are submitting their DBE reports monthly and tracking it and then following up to make sure that they are at minimum committing to those goals. And we can certainly get that information included in the committee report as they have more detail on the who, what, and the how.
Perfect, thank you.
Well, and typically, management committee tracks that
Right,
information.
and we get that.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? And we would be in need of a motion
So moved.
and a second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you. You have your orders to keep building the bench. Good job.
That's really what it's hard to do, but.
Okay, next up on the agenda is an information item, water policy research project.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. It's good to see you. I'm gonna wait till our slides come up. My name is Jen Kostrzewski. I'm the Assistant Manager of Policy and Planning and Water Resources.
And I'm Judy Sventek. I'm the Manager of Water Resources.
And so today we are going to start, this is the first one, but we are going to be seeing a lot of each other over the next few months to share a little bit more in depth. I know we gave you an overview of the Committee of the Whole about our water policy research project, but we're going to come back and we're going to give you a little bit more detail because we hope with your membership on the Environment Committee, you are a little bit more interested and want to dig into some of those details that we've learned and how that can be applied into our policy. So today we're going to keep the agenda pretty simple. We're going to make some connections, hopefully connecting back and jogging your memory about what we discussed at the Committee of the Whole. And then we are going to move forward and we're going to start talking first off just about the regional water context. I'm starting to learn just because I have a hydrology degree does not mean everyone has the same level.
I know.
And I know it's hard, I don't understand it, but so I'm hoping that we all can come to a level set understanding of what our regional water context is. Spoiler alert, we have a lot of it. And so how we can manage it so that we can sustain those waters into the future. And then we're going to follow up with our first paper. And so we are going to discuss our water reuse paper. Judy is going to take that lead on that paper for you all today. So with that agenda, here we go. We are responsible to write the Water Resources Policy Plan as part of the Regional Development Guide. This plan is hoping, or has the intent of ensuring sustainable waters in the region. It's going to be connected by the goals and visions that are set by the Regional Development Guide, but it's going to go a little bit deeper and more specific for our regional waters. We are going to commit, and have committed in the past, we're going to take it one step further to integrative water planning. So we don't just think about our wastewater, our water supply planning, or our water resources planning. We're thinking about that holistically across the region, because frankly, water does not follow political jurisdictions. It would be a lot easier if it did. And unfortunately, or excitingly, it does not. And so that pushes us into ways to collaborate and work with others. Our plan is where we put our policy, strategies, and actions, and it's decided by you all. And so this is that opportunity, this is the beginning of that conversation to figure out what policies, plans, and strategies we want to put in the 2050 version of this so that we can continue to go forward with the management of waters throughout the region. The last part of this is that there are various ways that this plan can commit the council to thinking about water. We do strongly suggest long-range visioning and planning. That is a good approach. Also really in the council's wheelhouse, so we should do that. But there's other ways of thinking about our regional system investments, our facility management, our technical assistance, our research and assessment, and other partnerships. And so we're going to come to you to continue that conversation to see how we frame out how environmental services and the council is going to commit to our own internal actions and regional expectations for water planning. We have 10 years to do this every time. And so it does start with the census information that gives us an understanding of where we are as a region from our residents, the distribution and demographics. And that helps inform where we can start thinking about our current conditions of our region and thinking about how we want to have the Regional Development Guide, the direction it goes in the system plan. So we're sort of on that downward side of the circle right now, thinking about
the hamster wheel.
The hamster wheel, if you will, exactly, Madam Chair. After we do finish get the plans adopted at the end of 2024, we will send out system statements to our communities that will help give them an understanding of what we want to learn from them and what we hope will require to have in their comprehensive plans. We will also provide resources so that they won't be just generating these plans on their own. So do think about that as we're thinking about requirements as well, as what resources. That's going to be part of the longer conversation, potentially into the next year. And then lastly, they will submit their plans, and we will get to implementation as a region. And so that's the 10-year cycle, and then, wouldn't you know it, pretty much the next census comes around, and the hamster wheel spins, and we keep going on. This timeline, I did say up front that we are going to adopt the plan at the end of 2024, so that is our end goal. We do have a series of engagement periods and drafting periods, so we're going to go out to the public to hear their feedback, and then we're going to come back and assess that feedback and see how we can incorporate it, and then continue that engagement and development process so that ideally, and I know I'm going on the record saying this, we won't have as many public comments when we get to that public comment period. That is very wishful, but that is the plan, is that our stakeholders will have had enough opportunity along the way to give us feedback and help work with us to make sure that we're drafting a plan and you all are making decisions with that information for the region. If you remember, there was a pretty large team of environmental services staff that came together to talk about different research topics. And so this is where our conversation is going to begin. Like I said, we're going to dig into each paper, give it some time today and with following environment committees. So we will be talking about protecting source water areas, rural water concerns, wastewater concerns, connections of water and climate, water availability, access and use, water quality, and water reuse. I was told to put them alphabetical, but now it looks kind of silly because we're going to start from the bottom and apparently go up, but we can adjust. And then lastly, just to give you the overall view of this, we know that there are multiple inputs that start the process, and so we aren't starting from scratch. We have a very good 2040 plan, and we're not going to throw away that content and just start over. Unfortunately, in the water world, some of our problems aren't easy to fix. So some of those policies and plans are going to carry forward to the next plan. The feedback that we hear from the research papers and you all also are going to be incorporated, and that will help us develop our potential objectives and policies for the water resources plan. We will then again continue to engage externally and work across the council to ensure that our system plans have integration and commonality with our policies. And we also will make sure that we're not setting unreasonable expectations. We need to make sure that our local partners have the ability to implement, partner, and make sure that we really are coming out with policies and plans and objectives that will work for the region and give us a pathway forward for the next 10 years. So that's the overall setting for the regional water objective. And you've seen this all before, so I'm hoping this is now jogging your memory and getting you excited to talk about water.
Wendy, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So if you go back to page 3, and so you're under the regional system plan that we're creating, right? And it's kind of a follow-up to what you're going to be talking about next, is how does information from the systems plans get back into the regional development guide? Because there is a feedback loop there, or my feeling is that there should be a feedback loop there. Water, we're going to potentially see constraints on growth and based on water access, water supply, etc., which should then feed back into the regional development guide. You don't have to answer it. I just want to put this out to the public, that I think it's not always a downward driven hamster wheel, but there's got to be a little baby hamster in there circulating around a little bit in there. So I just want to put that out there, saying that is my expectation to see, that somebody will be looking at what you're all doing here in the Environment Committee and Environmental Services, and feed that back up into the Regional Development Guide with some of the language constraints, and then help that guide the region as well. So nothing you have to say, but that's my expectation, is that should happen. So
I'm sure I will have one response. I had many hamsters growing up, and many of them had babies. So I almost expect baby hamster wheels in all of these different processes.
Madam Chair, can I respond to the question? I just want to, let you know, right before this meeting, there was a meeting in here of the different divisions. We were talking about how we're going to integrate all of the work we're doing in our different system plans into the regional development guide. So we are working very closely with the other divisions and the other sections and working on what's in the system plans versus what's in the regional development guide. It's all going to be one large plan this time around. So it's more so than ever, we are really trying to integrate those things, but please keep us on task if you feel like something is missing as we're going through.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So this gets us to the opportunity of talking about the regional context or the regional water context. First, I'm going to start with this map, and I want to acknowledge where we are in the larger context of southern Minnesota's waters. This map contains the Dakota names for the waters and communities, and it was created in the 1830s. And I want to acknowledge the fact that water was vital to the Dakota community. Water is vital to us. There are some consistencies across time, and it's important as now the current management and stewards of this region that we continue to hold water in this place in which we value it, we name it, and we take care of it. And we do. Our region and our lives are shaped by our waters every day, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall. In the winter, not me, but others go ice fishing. I know. I prefer to stay warm, much to my father's displeasure. And so we have this opportunity. We have over 950 lakes. In the summer, this is when I do enjoy them, there's opportunities for boating, recreation, connections, spiritual, and within the community to this water. So I want to make sure that we start here and start thinking about the human connection with water. Not only do we use it for our recreation, we use this to create the foods that we eat. And when we do use it for agriculture, we produce products, and water helps us move those commodities down to places in which we can start bringing them to market. So not only does water help create the food that we eat, it also helps us move it to those places so that we can grow our economy from it. I mentioned recreating. Water, if you start looking at our regional parks, is at the core of many of our regional parks. And we get 63 million park visitors regionally to that system. I can guarantee most of them are recreating near or in water when they go to that system. Water is important when we think about just our day-to-day existence. We pull water from the river and from our aquifers for our water supply. And it's up to water professionals to ensure that the water that we do drink as a region is safe and sustainable going forward. And so that shapes where water is available, where we can think about development, and where we can think about how our land use happens within the region. And speaking of land use, we use our waters in different ways. This is information of within the metro water uses. The majority of the water is pulled for public water supply, but we also use our water for irrigation. We have special categories in water level maintenance. We have industrial processing, and we have private domestic uses. So water is used all across the region in different ways, and we need to keep that in mind as we're planning and making decisions about water within this region. And perhaps a little bit near and dear to all of our hearts, once that water is used, if it enters the regional system, we have that opportunity to provide the service to our residents to treat that water. Across our 9 different plants, we treat on average 250 million gallons of water per day. And this is a service, as you can see in this picture, the effluent channel from the Metro plant, this is what is pictured on there, it seems, at least on this picture, a little less green. One would indicate that has a little less nutrient load in that water flowing into the river. So we are treating this water through our processes and returning it to the environment cleaner than the receiving bodies that they are contributing to. And so that's another way that we in environmental services and the council are helping tell that water story and keep that water sustainable for our region. That being said, looking at all of these waters on the map, and I apologize, the line work is a little thin on this, we do have water challenges. So all of the blue spots on this map are rivers, lakes, and streams in our metro. All of the red waters that are indicated on this map are waters that have some level of impairment from the Pollution Control Agency. So they are not meeting our state's water quality standards. This is an opportunity for us to think about protecting, restoring, and preserving our natural resources so that we can achieve that end goal that we set for ourselves in the Clean Water Act of fishable, drinkable, swimmable. This is one of our long-term goals, is thinking about our waters in that way. But we don't only think about surface waters. We do have vulnerable waters beneath our feet. So what this map is showing are the drinking water supply management areas in the metros. This is where water is sourced for communities within our region. And the various colors from red to blue are showing the vulnerability of the geology that's holding that water. So if you see areas in that reddish, salmonish, I'm sorry, I don't know what it looks like to your eyes, but in the top category there, that's areas in which the geology is very sensitive, and if you had a spill of contaminants in that management area, it could quickly get to water supplies. So that's an area in which we need to really think carefully about what are we doing on the surface of those lands and how it might impact the users of that water, which could have distribution systems pulling that water well beyond just that area of impact. And this is where it's just, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just keep on talking about challenges, because this is where we are in water right now for our region. So not only do we have vulnerable water supplies and impaired surface waters, we have additional challenges that are unique to us now in this moment. And so we have climate challenges. I've put up a whole bunch of graphs and I don't expect you to be able to discern the words on it, but I will tell you what we are hearing from scientists is that the future is going to be warmer and wetter. So we know that there's going to be more water that's coming to our region, but it's going to come more episodically. So we're going to see some of those bigger storms come through. At the same time, and this is what we are experiencing now, we have to also be planning and thinking about droughts. So as we're thinking about the future and thinking about 2050, we're going to have to be of two different minds in thinking about the fact that we're going to have big storms that will be distributing a lot of water in our area, and we might have prolonged periods in which we don't have a drop. And we have to design our systems and plan for the region to be able to be resilient for both of those situations. And, I'm just going to keep on saying and as all these slides, we hopefully will continue to have a growing population. Our region is growing and prosperous, and if we continue this trend, that means more people can come to our community and share our water resources. And so we need to make sure that we are managing it, and so that we're not feeling the stress of that additional population stress on our waters, whether we're thinking about drinking water supply or the impact of our surface waters or how we manage our stormwater. I apologize, my watch is buzzing right now. I'm gonna just put it away. So that does start thinking about some of these connections that are unique to the council. We have the opportunity to guide land use in our region, and how that land use affects water is in the wheelhouse of environmental services, community development, and the council as a whole. So I want to continue to make these connections here in the Environment Committee, and we will also continue to make them with other parts of the council as well, because this is at the core of the work that we do. These two maps show just two different time points in the metro. So the map on the left shows the 1984 land use, and the map on the right shows the 2020 land use. I know it's hard to see the legend, but I'm hoping that you can see that there's a lot more yellow area, so we're showing that we've had more development over that course of time. And the largest area in which we are seeing that development is single-family households. And so where we are developing our communities and where our populations are growing within the metro have immediate and direct impacts to our water resources, from both a water supply implications, our water reuse and stormwater stresses, and our wastewater system, as we're thinking about if these areas are connected to our regional system, how can we treat that waste in an effective way? And we are having growing contamination risks. These two maps do show, the map on the left shows the surface waters that have been impaired for PFAS. So the Pollution Control Agency has used a site-specific standard to identify these waters as being impaired for PFAS. And the map on the right shows the 14 communities in the East Metro that have been impacted by their water supplies being contaminated with PFAS. And so I'm just using PFAS as an example in this situation. As we continue to move towards 2050, I'm fairly confident that we will be having very similar conversations with whatever that next future contaminant of concern is, and we will work together across the water section to try and address those concerns. But I just want to say we have to be aware that this is going to be something that will continue to rise, and it is something we need to keep in mind as we make our policies. And we also have system shocks. There are things that maybe we could have planned for better, or maybe have just come out of the blue, and we need to make sure that we are creating the most resilient system. I ended up just doing a Google search of the most recent headlines. These are just examples. We can go back in history and also pick some system shocks. And so it's just something that we need to keep in mind as we are creating this plan to try and have the most resilient plan that we can, because we don't know what is coming between now and 2050. And so what do we do? What are the tools? Where do we operate? I do want to remind that we're not alone in taking on this challenge, but this is one of our biggest tools that we do have to address these challenges. We do operate the regional wastewater system. You can see this on the map of the different service areas of our treatment facilities. We are connected to 2.8 million people. We treat, as I mentioned before on an earlier slide, 250 million gallons of wastewater per day. This is one of the best ways that we are influencing the public health of our region and ensuring the environmental outcomes that we want to continue into the future. And we're not alone. We also have planning partners that help us think about surface water planning. There are 33 different watershed management organizations within the Metro. And through collaboration and partnership, we have found ways to implement at a regional level some real impressive improvements in water quality across our 7 counties. And we hope to continue that partnership moving forward. And just to add one more, we also have our local water suppliers that are helping to provide water supply for our region. The cities and communities that are colored, cities and townships that are colored in blue on this map are communities that have public water supply. So their communities provide a treated service for their residents. But I also don't want to leave out the areas shaded in gray. Those are areas that have private systems. So it's an individual with a well, and there's additional responsibilities for those individuals to ensure their water supply are safe and sound, and that's something we also should keep in mind as we're planning for the region. And I don't want to just throw, I mean, this is a graph, so I don't just want to throw data at you, even though this is data, but we decided, a colleague and myself decided that we are really good at discerning spatial data and looking at just water quality monitoring data, but we weren't as strong as to learn about what the residents of the region think. And so this last year and into this summer, we have continued to go out to survey our residents about where their water values are. And the idea behind this project is that this information can be incorporated as we are thinking about policies and plans, because there are different water values out in the community that might not match everyone in the room when we're thinking about the policies here at the council. And so this is an opportunity to elevate and amplify voices that wouldn't necessarily be part of this conversation. And so this is one graph that was showing the different water values that our residents think that are extremely important. And so if you can see, the first one is clean drinking water, equitable access to drinking water, water for future generations, habitat for fish and wildlife, and beaches, rivers, lakes are safe for swimming. You could continue to read down, but those are some of the values that our residents so far we've heard. And like I said, we are continuing to collect data, so this is just a snapshot of some of the data that we've heard. But we want to make sure that we are supporting policies and thinking about policies in ways that our residents also value their water. Just one more fun fact from this project. We did ask the respondents to identify some of the water issues that they thought were very concerning or extremely concerning. And so to the top of their list were aquatic invasive species, proper disposal of pharmaceuticals, water that is not healthy for fish, climate change impacts to water, and lead pipes or exposures to that in drinking water. And so this is not just for the council. We were asking about water broadly. And so we will be sharing with our water partners, whether it would be the DNR about this concern about aquatic invasive species, or the health department with the concern about lead pipes, or our water suppliers with the concern about the lead supply pipes. But this information and data set have been really interesting for us to get beyond what water professionals think, our residents think about water, and actually to ask the residents themselves. And so I'm hoping that my colleague and I will have a better report towards the end of this year that we will share with you all to give you a little bit more of that information. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek here and say that we're incorporating this as part of this regional water context because it's an important component. And so with all of that, thinking about all of the challenges we face and all of the different opportunities we face, because sometimes it's a different side of the same coin, these are the research topics that we decided to dig into and try and understand from that regional water context, what are some of the things that we can do or should do as we look forward to this plan. And so with that, we do have some discussion questions for you, but if you want to go and have your own discussion question for us, I support that as well. But I just want to ask, have you heard, and if any of your constituents have discussed any of these water challenges that we shared today, did any of this resonate with you? Were there any issues that you have heard of or knew of that we didn't present that we should be aware of? So is there any missing things that we should be thinking about? And then there's that open question of, do you have any other questions related to the highlighted issues that we've presented today?
And this is part one, so we're gonna
Yes.
pause here with questions and input on this, and then we will pick up with the information on the reuse paper.
Go ahead.
So this is very thoughtful and very organized and very easy to follow. So thank you very much for that. One of the things is on the regional water values. I guess, did you do any surveying on things like, you know, conservation or, you know, proactive actions that residents would take and how they feel about them? Because that's kind of the next step of having to actually deal with this. And second thing is that the context of what we're talking about cannot be overstated. To lay the groundwork and get everybody on the same playing field to really understand the challenges that we're facing. Lots of lakes, lots of rivers. But the one thing I do hear people want, they want clean drinking water. You know, they want to be able to turn on their tap and get good water, clean water. So those are just the comments that I'm thinking that are of interest.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cedarberg, to choose the two graphs to put into this
I know, I'm sure
was
you did
very
that.
hard. So I want to say that we do have a report. We learned a lot in this project, and I don't want to seal too much of our story because I do want to come back and tell you the whole
That's fine.
story.
You don't have to.
But we heard a lot. We ended up being a little, we had to shift plans. This happened over the course of the pandemic. And so we did end up sending out a mail survey, like through the US mail, to residents within the region. So we asked a bunch of different questions. And so I can get that, if you're interested, I can follow up.
We can roll it out
Okay.
when you want to roll it out.
Okay,
No
very
worries.
good. But yes, we did touch on conservation. We did touch on some of these other aspects as well.
Because those seem to be the divisive parts between communities, which may be, what I feel may be a pit communities against each other.
Yeah.
Why do I have to conserve just because of you? And
I also want to just add the part that we did learn from mailing surveys out is we can't control who participates in them. And so we did actually get a very good response. I think it was 35%, which is good for survey responses. Unfortunately, our respondents weren't as diverse because we wanted to really start touching into the different cultural values across our region. So this summer we are re-engaged with our partners at the U to go to specific cultural events with undergrads with tablets. And so we are doing in-person because that was the original plan. But now that we have more in-person events within the region, this is opening up opportunities to engage our residents a little bit more.
thanks.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, I was just going to say, I was happy to see some of the, when I look at the issues that you guys listed, water that is healthy for fish. There was a particular lake that I went to last year. Lake was fine. Came back the next year, it had been overrun with geese. And I love geese, I guess, in general. But then it occurred to me, someone needs to be really monitoring that because what happened was a lot of the fish started dying in this lake because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we're not going to be against the geese. As you know, it can't be like geese, fish, geese. So it just hit me in terms of the balance. We're trying to strike a good balance here. And, you know, and if we don't do this, you know, 10, 20 years from now, our people that follow us are going to say, what happened? You know, didn't those guys care? Or, you know, because you're stewards of what's going on. And the other thing is, for me, has always been drinking water. I distill my own water because originally I was from Philadelphia and I had a mistrust of the drinking water. They just had a bad problem out there. We're one of the few places in the country where we have really good drinking water, but that doesn't mean that's always going to follow. And there are probably some pockets where it's just as bad as some of the other places that we're hearing about. So those are my two primary concerns, and I'm hoping that we're going to continue to accept that responsibility the way that we should.
Madam Chair. Councilmember, I hope so too, and if you see us swerving away from some of those key issues for you, please pull us back, because.
Yeah, and I'm a science teacher, so I'm watching a little bit more.
Fantastic.
Well, so I was on the Lakeville City Council when we instituted water conservation measures. It was part of you couldn't drill more wells if you didn't do certain things, kind of a deal. And that would have been back in early 2000s. And the attitude at first was kind of angry, like, how dare you tell us what to do, and being annoyed with the water police and whatnot. And I've seen a shift over time. Like, I have one neighbor who ignores the rules, and the other neighbors talk about him in a very hostile way, like, dude, why aren't you, conserving water? Why are you wasting water, overwatering your lawn, kind of a thing. So there's definitely been a shift. And when people come here from other places and they maybe don't know the rules, there's a eagerness to help them learn what the rules are and be part of the solution. So I think that's been a cultural change over time.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I will say the most interesting part that I never thought I would go on this adventure is the more of the human behavior and psychology aspect of this. I was very analytical when I was in school and I wanted to not actually engage with people at all, ironically. And so the component of this, I think, now is behavior, and the opportunities of using perhaps peer pressure to guide behavior are something that we need to keep in mind as we're doing this.
And I've definitely observed people assuming that the water is bad because they came from someplace where the water was bad, and not understanding how much testing and protection there is in our water system to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, the other, just engage one more time, but the other downfall of, I think, being analytical in science is that we don't talk and communicate about ourselves and the work we do as well. And so that's something else that we need to start sharing more broadly, is just how amazing the water systems are, because it's harder as we're seeing aging infrastructure. People just rely on being able to turn on the tap, and they just assume that it's magic, and there's a lot of really hard workers behind that, so we want to make sure that we can tell those stories.
Anything else?
I'll just comment on both the presentation and what Councilmember Cedarberg said earlier. I think an important emphasis that I hope will become clearer and clearer is the idea of us as servant leaders holding the part and the whole at the same time. And that sounds really pretty simple, but it's actually very hard to do. So as Judy referenced, there was a meeting before this meeting tonight where that very effort of trying to connect different ideas together that haven't been connected or associated with different parts of the plan directly at the early whole, so I think we're going to see a development framework that isn't a collection of separate chapters, but a whole that has different systems that are part of achieving and supporting that. And that's what we're going to need for those really serious challenges we have, because no one part will be able to address those big challenges that require across the board participation. And so that's the learning journey that we're on, is slowing ourselves down. Instead of going fast alone, we're going to go slow so we can go together and go further. And any support we can get from you along the way, sometimes cheerleading helps, because it is a little frustrating when you're ready to go forward and do things that you know and have the science and the understanding to do, and you have to connect with someone else to get them connecting and to understand how their work connects with your work and those ideas connect together. So it's a tall challenge for us, but there's a lot of passion and importance and understanding of the need for us to do this and do it well.
Thank you for that, because if we don't do it now, we can't wait 10 years. I mean, and we're really at an inflection point. I mean, that's what I really feel. Scientifically and just, with the growth that's going on, it's like, we have to seize this moment now to do that. So let us know, let me know how I can help any other way, because the drought has definitely affected a lot. It's killed off most of my trees, basically, so now and I'm not gonna water them, I'm gonna have to take them down, because they can't be saved, but that's fine, but that's, a big part of it, so thank you for kind of setting that up, and it's clear you've been working on this for many years, so there's a lot of work that's gone into this.
But I just want to add quick to that is that we are working on really hard to integrate those things, and I think it will be much different than what it has looked like in the past. But then there's also I want you to know that there's also like different requirements for each of the system plans, so that will be part of it too. So they aren't going to be able to look totally all the same everywhere, because I know there's federal requirements for the system, or for the transportation system. We have to put things in there as what's required in comp sewer plans, local water plans, and water supply plans, and things like that. So I just wanted to quickly say that. Okay. Okay. Are you ready to move on? So I'm excited today to be here to talk about the first research paper. So like Janice mentioned, we have the 7 topic areas. Does not mean we are not looking at other issues. A lot of the other issues in the plan are things that just carry forward. These are kind of what we worked with partners on in kind of getting input several years ago on what are these new issues or areas we'd like to dig into further. So that's where the 7 topics came from. And the first one we're going to be talking about today is water reuse. And when I'm talking about water reuse, we're focusing on stormwater reuse and wastewater reuse. That's what our paper has focused on. And also I wanted to let you know that the current water policy plan has this overall goal of sustainable water resources for the region. And what that really means is that we have abundant, high quality groundwater and surface water resources that support the state's growing water supply needs and unique ecosystems. And then we really have to achieve this in multiple ways: wise use of water through our expanding water conservation and promotion of efficient and cost-effective water reuse. So that's what we're talking about today, is water reuse. And we are also focusing on water reuse for non-potable use. We're not talking about water reuse for potable use at this time in Minnesota. So water reuse, as I said, is one tool that we can use to offset the limitations that we have on water quality and quantity issues in the region. I mean, the good example right now is the drought going on and the implications, and there's already communities that are being told to water less and reduce use, and so reuse is one of those tools that we can use to kind of help build up our supplies for using reuse for non-potable uses that allows us to have more water for potable reuses. Just a few definitions of the different types of reuse. Water reuse for wastewater is really what we're talking about is the practice of reusing treated wastewater from a wastewater treatment plant for beneficial use before it's being released back into the water cycle. We have gray water reuse, which is reuse of water from showers, sinks, or washing machines. So that's really water that in theory has not come into contact with fecal matter, and it can be used typically as an irrigation source. Industrial process water is water that is in a closed loop system within an industrial use, and that typically is reused for like cooling water that can help distribute heat energy within the system. Rainwater reuse is really a subset of stormwater reuse, but there are different requirements for rainwater reuse versus overall stormwater reuse. This water is intercepted off the roof, does not directly come into contact with the ground, so it's not picking up the contaminants that often are washed off on the ground. And then stormwater reuse is the wider category of collection of stormwater and retention ponds or cisterns for future uses. Broadly, this category is usually used for irrigation as well.
Before you go off of that slide, the little message board thing there made me laugh, because it's not like you would ever drink the toilet water anyway, so I would think, but.
Well, and I think that is the thing. So reusing water is kind of a newer thing in Minnesota. So you have to put all these cautionary signs so that people don't reuse it inappropriately, but you're not gonna drink toilet water, no, but you also, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So the first thing we did with all of these research papers, and like I said, this is the first one we're talking about today, so we're kind of a similar process that we'll go through with slides in the future ones, was we developed issue statements for each of the topics. So I really wanna just read through these because it's important to hear and see all the pieces of it. So sustainable water resources are a necessary component of a growing prosperous region, and water reuse is just one strategy to help ensure that sustainability. Contamination, potable water demand, regulatory use limits, and changes in our climate may compromise our availability and quality of our regional water resources, as we're seeing with the drought, we're seeing with the PFAS in the water in the eastern part of the region. Currently, we kind of lack a clear process to implement non-potable stormwater reuse. There are people doing a lot of stormwater reuse, but the process is not clear. The communities trying to implement it are frustrated and are looking for that better direction on how it should be done. And I'll let you know, in 2018, the state of Minnesota, with a working group of state agencies, put together a report on reuse, including stormwater reuse and all the other types of reuse that I mentioned on the previous slide. And there was, so they put out a document on where they want to go with it. There was a lot of controversy, I'll say, about the stormwater reuse, and that maybe they were pursuing or looking at too restrictive requirements for stormwater reuse. So they are in the process, the state, the health department is in the process of putting together a stakeholder group to kind of take the next step with that, to help develop a better, clear process so the exact requirements are known and the exact process or how you go about doing stormwater reuse is really clear. Wastewater reuse is a little bit different because there's already some PCA guidance on how you do wastewater reuse. So that is like one of the big pieces of this issue statement, that we need to develop that better process and clear guidance. And then, as I just mentioned, that this process needs to be developed with the stakeholders and users, people who want to use this in the region, to help kind of at least support that development of that process. So next thing we kind of looked at is what is the council's role in each of these research papers, and really we have focused our policy work and programs around reuse for the non-potable water supplies, as I mentioned before. We have done a few things related to reuse. We've had several grant programs for stormwater reuse. We've actually helped fund the project at the Saint Stadium, where they reuse the roof runoff from our maintenance facility for the light rail right next door. They reuse that. They treat it to some degree. They use it in some of the bathrooms for toilet flushing, as well as on the lawn for irrigation. So that is one project we funded. We funded other projects for communities who are using storm ponds, reused from storm ponds, to irrigate, and some communities do it with, at this point, with little to no treatment of that, and then they typically then will irrigate it at night when they won't come into contact with people. And then there's other communities we funded projects where they're actually have a system in place where they are reusing water from a storm pond that they send through some type of disinfection, and then they make that water available to the citizens living in that area to water their lawns and things like that. So some examples out there, but still, we're still kind of working on this, and it's, you know, it's still moving forward in that process. And then we also looked at reuse in our treated effluent. We had a potential customer several years ago who was looking into maybe putting a facility in place where they might be able to use treated effluent to help offset some of their water demand there. That did not go through, but that also led to us putting in place and doing an amendment to the last water policy plan to give us a process for how we would go about doing wastewater reuse. Next thing we kind of looked at were the primary drivers that are out there, and Jen already kind of talked about this in her part. Primary drivers: population growth, urbanization, climate change, droughts, increased irrigation, and increased industry. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it is important to know that all these factors were driving why we would like to look at reuse as another option, basically to, like I said, helps support and sustain our water resources so that we have more potable water use that the cities are providing, and then you can use this non-potable source for other, mostly irrigation at this time. Then we kind of went on to talk about the crucial concerns. For stormwater reuse, one barrier, as I mentioned, is that there currently is no standardized system or clear oversight of who's requiring what and what type of monitoring, if you need treatment, if all those elements. The rules are not very clear, and that's what we're going to be working on starting later this year with a new committee that the health department will be putting together. So hopefully they'll bring in the right partners, people who have been doing reuse. They can show the results of their reuse. They've been testing to see if the water is clean enough from these store ponds to reuse and things like that. So we'll be able to kind of work on that direction for that. Also, stormwater reuse generally has a higher cost than using potable water for irrigation, for example. And then there are operational and maintenance costs as well. However, as we have more droughts and other stresses on our existing water systems, we need to look at reuse for non-potable uses in order to help offset those stresses and the costs. Then looking at wastewater reuse, crucial concerns, there is like I said, a more advanced regulatory pathway for non-potable wastewater reuse. As with stormwater reuse, wastewater reuse still probably would cost more than current use of potable water. I know we did analysis as part of that study to serve that industry that wanted to reuse wastewater, and we still couldn't match the cost of if they could get that relatively cheap water from the cities. And also, depending on the end use of that use for that wastewater reuse, additional treatment may be required. We also found that we have somewhat high chloride content in our wastewater effluent, which kind of limits some of the reuses that you'd be able to use for reuse, unless you do additional treatment. So, I mean, there are ways around these things that just cost more. And then papers then go to the next step, and they kind of lay out what the current policy is in our plans for the topic area. And this just is a lot of words on a page. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully you have the slides and you can look at it later. It's really that, wanted to show that we already have this water conservation and reuse policy in our work. We're trying to look at it to see how we could advance that work. And then, like I said, we also did that amendment to advance in the wastewater reuse piece already. But where we want to go, the next step and final step in those papers is really, it's kind of like, it's some policy recommendations, some action recommendations. It's really recommendations of what we need to consider and think about putting into policy in our next plan, and you all need to give us direction and guidance on that. So there's a couple slides. The first two are about stormwater reuse recommendations. The last one's about wastewater. So this one is really the recommendation is that we will continue to work with our partners and impacted stakeholders to advance stormwater reuse. We think that's really one of the tools we need to really keep working on for promoting sustainable water. And that we will share information and resources to help develop that guidance, by working on that health department committee and with other groups really helping to really develop more guidance. We do have a conservation toolbox that has a little bit of information on our website already that talks about reuse and things like that. Needs to be updated with this new process and standards. So we will continue to kind of be an avenue for getting the information about how we do reuse out there. Also, we're suggesting that in collaboration with our partners, we help inform the direction on whether further guidance is needed. And I've already hinted that yes, further guidance is needed and a clear process. So we'll be working on that, or we're proposing to work on that. And that is the thing, is some work will be starting this year. So some of these actions will actually be starting before this policy plan is adopted, but they're consistent with the last policy plan. So I just also wanted to acknowledge that. And then the other thing that we heard clearly was that even when somebody was looking to do a reuse project, they didn't know which agency to go to, who was responsible for what. So we really need to do a better job of defining the different agencies' roles in reuse and figuring that out for people so they know where to go. So the second recommendation about stormwater reuse is that we will support stormwater reuse in Minnesota where feasible, similar to the last one, as a way to achieve our sustainability goals for the region. We will promote stormwater reuse as a viable water source. We will seek to potentially have another funding grant program to help support reuse. Reuse is expenses, as I mentioned. I know that a lot of partners that we funded in the past were very appreciative of the money we were able to give them. It really helped them kind of push the envelope and do that reuse project, which they might not have done if they didn't have funding partners. And they're also, we helped fund these projects so that they could be like a showcase for other communities to see what was out there and just kind of get the word about how it could be done. So I think that has been very successful in the past, and maybe we look for clean water funds or some other source to help fund more of these projects in the future. Then we will also work with our partners to remove obstacles as appropriate, because not all obstacles should be removed, but as appropriate, so that we can have that, push that reuse more and make it a more common practice. And then we also want to kind of lead by example and implement stormwater reuse at some of our facilities for demonstration purposes as well, where possible. Moving on to wastewater reuse. Only one page for that, but what we're looking at here is that we will work in partnership with others to promote wastewater reuse as a viable water source. We will continue to work with our partners to identify the external opportunities for reuse. I know we need to look into more and what kind of treatment that would require, what kind of uses, because you certainly, it's not feasible to reuse some stormwater or even wastewater treated effluent. If it has too high chloride, it's really bad for lawn, so it's not a good thing for irrigation or things like that unless it's treated. But there's probably other avenues we will look into, and we're willing to partner when people have projects to come and talk to us about. Let's see, we will clearly identify on our website who to contact, because that was not clear to people either. As if I have a wastewater reuse project, where do I go? How do I get something started? How do I have a conversation? So that's a simple thing we can do. And like I said, we will provide additional treatment to meet PCA reuse requirements for internal use to advance our practice as well. So I kind of went through that pretty quickly. We do have, the reuse paper is online and available. If you're interested in reading the entire paper, there's an executive summary that is also available. It kind of gives you more of the details of what I just went over. But with that, we kind of wanted to have a discussion. First, any questions you have, happy to answer those. But also we're looking at, have you or any of your districts, cities, or townships discussed reuse with you? Or have you heard of the need for either more help for us in an area, or potential grant programs to help offset costs like we've done in the past, or things like that, or just any issues that they're having with reuse and how we could work with them to kind of help resolve some of that. And then also the team identified a lack of guidance as an obstacle for stormwater reuse. Does this align with your experiences? Wastewater reuse and stormwater reuse are not currently economical when compared to potable water use. Even as we are starting to see hyper-localized situations that might change that. But what can or should we do to help overcome some of these constraints? So I guess we'd open it up for questions and discussion.
I do want to add one more thing, just for this paper and all future papers. Please don't feel constrained by our recommendations.
Yes.
Because the recommendations were put into the paper, that does not mean that those should become policy. And the reverse is also true. If you see something that is missing in the paper that should be put into policy, these are the discussions that we're hoping to highlight, that part of it.
And I should also add, so a lot of the recommendations are basically a starting point that we got input from we have a water resources policy plan advisory group made up of watershed administrators, city engineers, public works, city administrators. So that group, as well as we have our metro area water supply advisory committee, as well as the technical committee that we've taken these papers to and gotten their feedback on. We're in the process, some of them are online, getting additional input. So this is, like Jen said, a starting point, a place to start the conversation to see how far you want us to go with these things and where we should go with these things.
And I do have one suggestion, when we're gonna be talking about the papers, instead of making us go hunt for them on the website, put links right in the agenda.
Will do.
That would be helpful.
Yes.
I mean, I did do the hunting and finding, but I prefer not to.
I totally understand.
Yeah,
Questions, comments?
yeah, I did
Go
have
ahead.
a question. The issue of forever chemicals, it's been coming up a lot lately, and are you going to have a specialized program? Are you developing specialized program in the future to specifically deal with that issue? Because actually, when I go fishing, I think about that.
Right.
And
Madam Chair, council member. I'm kind of looking at Kyle in the back to see, I don't know if we were planning anything with our wastewater pieces of, I do know that is gonna be an issue potentially with reuse, because yes, if we're promoting reuse and we're promoting in that eastern metro area, all of a sudden in the last year, 2 years, we have this issue with PFAS everywhere, and it's like, it is a big issue. We haven't gotten that far I don't think to answer that question, but I know I've had questions from other communities ask me recently even if simple things like, can we work with them to start up a kind of like project or work together to figure out where we should see sampling in other places to find out where these chemicals are, because it is, as we do more sampling, we're probably going to find it in other places, and you're right, it will limit what we can reuse this for potentially, so we'll have to consider that in all of this. So I would say we were like very excited and gung-ho about reuse, but now we have these other factors kind of creeping in that we have to consider. What kind of treatment would we need? How would we do this? And things like that.
A comment I'm thinking, so Hugo is now in my district 11, so they've been talking, they do stormwater reuse. And what I'm expecting is, I'm hearing from Lake Elmo and other places about water reuse, and that, where stormwater reuse is not currently economical. However, it probably may become economical with the White Bear Lake groundwater group that you're convening, because the cost of hooking up surface water versus reuse. And so that might be a really good study in the finances of water reuse versus connecting to surface water and pipes and all of that. So it could be kind of the perfect storm to really look at all of these things in conjunction. You might be able to get some real cost information, and water reuse may all of a sudden become economically viable. So I know you're involved with that, but that's, I'm hearing everything, District 11. So.
And Madam Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg, we funded several projects in Hugo for the reuse before things kind of slowed down a little bit with the unclear process and the 2018 report that came out from the health department. And I know they're still continuing, they do a lot of work in that area. So it is something that we need to be aware of. And that part of the White Bear Lake effort is a requirement to look at financial costs of different practices, one of which is reuse and what we would get out of that from doing more reuse in that area. So hopefully that will apply then to other places.
Right. That's what I'm thinking too.
Yep.
So.
Anything else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to thank you, first of all, for putting all this together. It's a beautiful report. I just want to echo what you said earlier, that we need to do a better job when it's come who to contact when they have issues. So in that case, we need to do more about that.
Is that it?
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually did a lot of the public hearings and such about the proposed water reuse thing in Rosemount in Grove Heights when that was going on, so I learned more about it than I ever wanted to know. I was surprised to find out that our wastewater is salty, but
And depending on the reuse, what they're going to use it for, there might be too many metals or something. There's all kinds of things that we have to investigate for each type of reuse. So.
Madam Chair, I will add on that for our system, we have worked to have a really robust centralized regional system, and that is a really good solution for some. But it does make reuse a little bit more difficult because we've set up a gravity system which brings all of the water to the end of the down of the hill. And if we want to have reusers that are a little bit further uphill, it's going to be an energy demand to get that water back. And so it's also something that we need to just consider, that reuse is a tool. It's not always the only tool, But it has bigger implications as we are thinking about our system, where we're thinking about planning for the system and thinking about future uses, knowing that there's also those additional concerns of climate and forever chemicals and things. So it's a good tool. It's not necessarily the only tool, but it is definitely something we should be exploring.
Have we been working at all to recruit users up in East Bethel? Because, I mean, we kind of set that up to do that, and then everybody went, ooh, no, we don't want that. And so how are we working on that?
Well, we're doing a groundwater instead of discharging.
Right.
Right, so that's serving recharging of the aquifer in some respects. So that's the extent we're at. It's a very low volume. So I don't think we're even in a situation where if we wanted to get somebody to directly reuse that water, that we'd have that much to provide. So the investment in the whatever it would take to get it to the point where you wanted to use it would probably not be of interest at this point. But I think what East Bethel has done is shown that we can treat to that higher level of standard consistently, and that we test the groundwater and do things to see what kind of impact is it having, just like we do with our receiving waters, in a sense, to make sure we're not having detrimental effect on the environment. So that's a pilot to show the possibilities, and I think through some of the discussion points you heard tonight is can we get the public to think even further with that wastewater reuse, and to Jen's point, can we think about new facilities and less centralization of our facilities as we have new facilities? Because we're here for the long haul. When we build a facility for 100 years, what are we going to need in 100 years in this region? And if we can start now with that view of what the challenges are and what's going to be the best way to solve it affordably and reliably, we'll set the future up well for our ancestors.
And there may be opportunities for some of the rural standalone cities to do infiltration instead of into a water body as a solution.
Madam Chair, I should have mentioned this, but I mean, one of the issues with stormwater reuse at times is the fact that if you don't have stormwater runoff, you don't have water to reuse. So I mean, the ponds are drying up or they're low, and so we have to think about all those.
Well, I have heard that Hugo caught somebody with their garden hose from their house filling the pond so that they could water the lawn from the pond. So sometimes there's some education that needs to go with that too. That's not the point.
Yes. Madam Chair, I just want to give you a little teaser so you can get excited for the next topics. Nika, it's going to change, so I will send you an email. I'm sorry. The plan has been disrupted. So our next two papers that we're going to discuss is the climate and water, and then the rural concerns paper. So we're going to bring those two forward. Unfortunately, those are not yet on the website. So what I'm going to work with Nika is to get the executive summaries attached, so you can at least have access to those ahead of time. So you can have some, and then when the papers do come, I'll make sure that we have all of the links available so that it will be way more accessible.
Great, thank you. Is there any other comments or last thoughts?
I just want to make a final comment. The original charge for the Metro Council was to clean up the water. When they did that survey and the Mississippi, they only found 3 live fish. And if it wasn't for that idea that we needed to clean our water, and there were 31 different stations, and most of them didn't pass EPA. So this is the most important thing we can do, is clean up the water.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I can, one last comment. So this is the format that we were planning to use for the research paper presentations, and once we get to the policy discussions, we'll be like in this room a little bit more informal. I mean, still formal, a little bit more informal, so we can have these discussions. If there's something you would like us to change in this process, please let us know.
And my question with that is, I'm not watching this from home, so normally when we're in the other room, we each have a microphone. And so I would assume that the audio is better when we're in the other room. But yeah, I know there's microphones everywhere, but I don't know how good it works. So maybe check with our tech guys to make sure that it's actually something that people can hear and understand if they're not able to be physically present.
And Madam Chair, I also want to offer, I know that sometimes really good ideas come to me after I leave meetings. And so if that happens to you, you have our emails at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to reach out and send those really good ideas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have General Manager's report. We have a report.
I only want to add that this is a really important conversation, and just to take that gerbil wheel one step further.
Hamster wheel.
Or hamster wheel, yes. Was it
Yeah,
Janet
really,
said she had
gerbils,
gerbils? I don't
that's
know.
I did have a dribble too.
Here you go. This is a process, to your point, it has to go both ways. Information has to flow, and that's so we can come up with better plans, but it's also so that that information people brought, but other parts they didn't know, they can also be informed that their thinking will shift. And so it's a dual benefit. Helps us build better plans, and it helps others understand the need for thinking about things a little bit different than they may have arrived to the discussion. So we're going to want to get help getting a lot of people on that hamster wheel so that they can engage with us as we work on our framework.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There being no further business to come before us, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.